In the world of wild predators, the wolf holds a special place. It is not the biggest, the fastest, or the strongest animal in the forest, but it is one of the smartest and most organized. That's why wolves have survived where many others have vanished. They can adapt to almost any environment: forests, mountains, steppes, even the tundra. If there's even a little prey, the wolf will find a way to survive. Wolves are social animals. They live in packs. It's not just a group of predators, but a real family with a clear hierarchy. At the top stands the alpha pair, a male and a female. They are not chosen because of strength or aggression. On the contrary, the best leader is the one who knows how to guide others, make the right decisions during a hunt, protect the pack, and care for the young. A typical wolf pack consists of 6 to 10 individuals, but can grow up to 20. There are adult wolves, adolescents, and even pups. Everyone has a role. Even the young learn through play, observing how adults hunt, studying scents, and watching the prey's reaction. This isn't just instinct, it's learning. Wolves primarily eat meat. Their main prey are hoofed animals: deer, roe deer, wild boars, chamois, and in the mountains, wild goats or sheep. In rural areas, they may sometimes attack livestock, especially if there's little food in the forest. But in truth, they always try to avoid humans. If a wolf attacks domestic animals, it's a sign of hunger or something being off in the ecosystem. Hunting is a team effort. A single wolf cannot kill a large deer alone, but the pack works in coordination. One chases, another lies in ambush, others attack from the side. They can pursue prey for hours without tiring, changing tactics depending on the situation. These animals don't kill for fun. If a wolf kills, it eats almost everything. Leftovers may be buried or given to the young. There is a certain feeding order. The alpha pair eats first, then the rest. But even the lowest-ranking wolf will not go hungry. Wolves have an incredibly keen sense of smell. They can detect the scent of prey from several kilometers away. Their hearing is also remarkable. They can hear frequencies beyond the range of the human ear. Their eyesight is average, better at night than during the day, but they mostly rely on scent and sound. Interesting fact, a wolf can travel up to 60 kilometers in a night. It doesn't run, but trots at a steady pace, conserving energy. Thanks to this, wolves can cover large territories, from 100 to 1,000 square kilometers, depending on the environment. Wolves usually live 6 to 8 years in the wild. In captivity, longer, up to 14 to 15. But the most important years are the first 3. That's when the wolf develops skills: hunting, interaction, hierarchy. Wolves are widespread around the world. They can be found in North America, Europe, Asia, and even parts of the Middle East. In Europe, wolves were nearly exterminated by the 20th century, but since the 1980s, populations have started to recover. Now they can be found in the Carpathians, the Balkans, Poland, Germany, and France. In the forests of western Ukraine, there are also stable populations. In mountainous regions, wolves often stay at higher elevations, where people rarely go. They need forests for cover, rocks or slopes for orientation, and pastures or clearings for hunting. In winter, wolves are more active. It's easier to track prey in the snow, and the same tracks often betray the victim. In folktales, wolves are often portrayed as predators to be feared, but not always. In many cultures, they were symbols of strength, wisdom, even protection. In Roman mythology, a she-wolf nursed Romulus and Remus. In Ukrainian and Carpathian legends, there are beliefs about werewolves, people who turn into wolves. And among shepherds, there was a prayer against the wolf, not as an enemy, but as a force to be honored, so it wouldn't touch the flock. Wolves avoid conflicts with humans. Attacks on people are almost never recorded. If it happens, it's usually a sick, rabid wolf, or one that has lost its fear due to prolonged exposure to humans. Today, the wolf is under partial protection in many countries. Eliminating it disrupts ecological balance. Wolves regulate herbivore populations, preventing them from destroying vegetation. Where wolves disappear, balance vanishes too. They are not mythical creatures, not a fairy tale. They are real, cautious, watchful, dangerous, but only when threatened or when hunger clouds instinct. Sometimes they look out from behind a tree, quietly, unnoticed. And if you are not afraid, they won't attack. Because a wolf never seeks conflict, but always remembers who started it. High in the mountains where clouds sometimes brushed the treetops and the paths resembled deer trails, there lived a boy. He was about 13, maybe 14. He grew up in a mountain village tucked away among the slopes and pine forests. There were no stores, no paved roads, no big houses, just wooden huts, old fences, and the constant scent of smoke hanging in the air, especially in the evenings. His father was a hunter. Since childhood, the boy had grown used to seeing him leave the house early in the morning with a rifle slung over his shoulder, a stern gaze, and always in silence. He would go into the mountains for a day, 2, sometimes even a week, and each time he returned tired, sometimes with game, sometimes without, but always with the same look of a man who had spent a long time staring into the forest depths. But the boy loved spending time with his grandfather most of all. His grandfather was a shepherd. All his life he had tended to sheep, his own small but well-kept flock. He had a bit over 30 sheep, black, gray, white, with bells around their necks. He called them by name. Even if they all looked alike, he knew exactly who was who. The pasture was above the village, on an open plateau where grass grew thickly among the rocks, and clouds slowly rolled overhead. That's where they would go together. The grandfather, with a stick in hand and a dog by his side, the boy, and with a satchel on his back and questions in his head. They often stayed there until evening, sometimes overnight. The grandfather liked to pitch a small tent by the sheepfold, light a fire, and cook porridge from a field kitchen. The boy would sit beside him and listen, because the old man knew how to tell stories, not loudly, not theatrically, just plainly as it was. He talked about wolves, not as enemies, but as part of the forest. Back in the day, the grandfather would say, stirring the porridge, wolves used to live closer, until we scared them away with our rifle. They're not stupid. They see that people are dangerous and they go deeper into the woods, but sometimes they come back, because they have to live too. Aren't you afraid they might attack? The boy would ask. If they're hungry, they might. But a wolf isn't a fool. He won't go near fire unless he has to, and they take sheep only when we haven't been watchful. The boy liked listening to this, not because he believed wolves were magical creatures, but because everything in his grandfather's words always seemed simple and clear. The sheepdogs knew their job. They patrolled in circles, chased after lambs when they strayed, and howled when they heard something suspicious at night. But the nights were calm. From the mountain meadow, you could see a starry sky, and the air smelled of pine resin, smoke, and damp wool. The boy learned to distinguish forest sound, the rustle of a hare, the crackle of wind in the branches, the cry of a jay warning others about nearby humans. He knew when it was okay to leave the sheep unattended for an hour, and when it was absolutely not. And he also knew the way his grandfather looked into the distance, as if seeing something out there the boy didn't yet understand. Sometimes his father would visit the pasture, rifle on his back. They would nod at each other, stand silently for a few minutes, and then his father would move on. The hunter and the shepherd, two worlds that met for a moment, only to part ways again. His father was stern, not cruel, just quiet. He didn't like to speak unnecessarily, but he always made sure there was food in the house, that his son had warm clothes, that everything around the household was in order. His love was quiet, like a winter wind. It didn't shout, but it cut straight to the bone. His grandfather, the opposite. He talked, laughed, grumbled, sang old songs under his breath, and he always had a piece of cheese or a dried pear in his pocket for the boy. Remember what he used to say, the forest is not your enemy, but it's not your friend either. It lives its own life. If you want to live in it, listen and don't interfere. And so the days passed. The sheep grazed, the dog chased hares, the grandfather dried mushrooms on the porch, and the boy soaked in the rhythm of that life. Slow, real, mountainous, until something changed. But that's another part of the story. It all started with a small thing. One morning, when the grandfather and the boy were getting ready to head to the flock, the dog was already waiting outside the house, as usual. But instead of the usual barking and fussing, it just paced in place, whimpered, and kept glancing toward the forest. Something's not right, the grandfather said, putting on his hat. At the pasture, several sheep were missing. They noticed it immediately. There were fewer bells ringing, and gaps gaped among the woolly mounds. The dog ran in circles, then darted toward the edge of the slope, sniffing something in the grass, and whined. There was no blood on the ground, only trampled grass and tracks, unclear but large. Must have been wolf, the grandfather said, bending down, but he didn't sound certain. The boy knelt beside him, inspecting the prints. They did resemble wolf tracks, long with distinct paw pad marks, but something about them didn't feel right, as if the wolves weren't going toward the prey, but away from something. All the tracks led deeper into the forest, not toward the flock. They weren't torn apart, the boy said. Just taken? Or maybe they ran off themselves, the grandfather shrugged. Who knows? But there was definitely an animal. That evening, they didn't stay overnight. The boy was quiet. He kept replaying in his head what he had seen. The grandfather tried to distract him, telling stories about old winters, about a time a bear had once broken into the hayloft. But the boy only half listened. The next day, the village began to murmur. More sheep had disappeared, this time from the neighbor down the hill. And the day after that, chickens from Aunt Maria. Everyone started whispering, wolves, saying a pack had come down from the highlands, searching for something. At the village council meeting, the boy's father was one of the first to speak up. It's wolves. This isn't the first time. I saw tracks nearby last year. We have to act. Otherwise, it won't stop at just sheep. He spoke briefly, firmly, as always. People agreed. Some brought old ammunition. Others recalled where traps were stored. Everyone was on edge. The boy listened from the corner. Something inside him resisted. He couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't so simple. The tracks he had seen, they didn't lead to the flock, but away from it. And also, no blood, no fur, no bones, nothing. Wolves don't leave prey behind. They eat it. They don't drag it into the woods without a trace. That evening, he sat with his grandfather on the porch. Do you really think it was wolves? The grandfather fell silent. He took a long drag on his pipe and exhaled. I don't know. I've seen wolves take sheep. It's quick, brutal. This doesn't feel the same, but we have no other explanation. What if it's not wolves? The boy leaned forward. What if it's something else? Like what? I don't know. Maybe something that wants us to think it's wolves? The grandfather smiled. Not mockingly, sadly. Maybe you're right, but people don't want to think. People want to fear, and fear is always simple. That same week, the father began preparing for a hunt. He cleaned his rifle, packed his backpack. He prepared like always, silently, focused. He only said, I'll be gone for 3 days. I'll check the pass, see if there are fresh tracks. If I find the pack, I'll finish them. The boy said nothing, just nodded. But that night he couldn't sleep. His mind was spinning. And after his father left, it got worse, as if something invisible and cold was hanging in the air. On the third day, 3 more lambs disappeared. Even though he and his grandfather had stayed by the fold overnight, the dog barked only once, briefly, then fell silent. No one understood what had happened. This doesn't seem like wolves anymore, the grandfather muttered. They don't steal, they kill. The boy didn't say anything, but something in his gaze had changed. He wasn't waiting for explanations anymore. He wanted to find out for himself. That night, he didn't go to sleep. He only pretended. When his grandfather began to snore in the next room, the boy put on his jacket, pulled up his hood, and quietly slipped out of the house. He had no weapon, only a knife and a flashlight, but in his mind, a goal: to go into the forest, to see, to be sure. He didn't believe it was wolves. The boy walked in darkness. The trail led upward, among the trees where branches cracked underfoot and the wind howled through the pines like a living thing. His flashlight glowed faintly, but he tried not to use it too much. He knew that in the forest, light draws attention. It was early autumn. The days were still warm, but the nights had turned cold. He had only his jacket, an old bag with bread, a canteen of water, and a small pocket knife. But he wasn't afraid, only a quiet resolve to go all the way. He was heading to the place where the last lambs had vanished. There, on the slope, the dense thickets began. The dog had sniffed that way before, but the grandfather hadn't let it go further. Said it was too late, too dangerous. But the boy didn't listen. Now he was going alone. An hour, 2, the night deepened. The slopes grew steeper. The flashlight flickered. The grass beneath his feet was damp. An owl hooted somewhere to the left. The boy stopped, listening intently. And then he heard it, a rustle. Not wind, not a branch. Something was moving, quietly, cautiously assumed, but definitely behind him. He turned around and saw eyes. A pair of light yellow eyes flashed in the bushes. Then another, then another. 3, 4, 5 wolves. He froze. His heart pounded in his chest, but the wolves didn't attack. They stood almost motionless, watching. One, gray and the largest, stepped forward, and it didn't growl, didn't bare its teeth, just stared, then turned and slowly walked deeper into the forest. The others followed. The boy stood still, didn't move, but something told him this wasn't by chance. This was an invitation, and he followed them. They didn't run, just walked. Sometimes they stopped, looked back at him to see if he was still following, then continued on. They didn't go too far, maybe half a kilometer, and a clearing appeared. There, among the trees, stood an old, half-ruined forester's cabin. The roof had collapsed on one side, the windows were broken, but the walls still held. Something was lying by the entrance. The boy stepped closer and saw a large wolf, gray, its heavy body breathing in short, painful gasps. One paw was clamped in a rusty trap, old, broken, corroded, but still dangerous. The wolves formed a circle around it. No one growled. They just stood there silently, like guardians, like a family. The boy crouched, looked at the wolf. It didn't thrash, didn't snarl, just looked back. Its eyes were full of pain and something else, something strange, almost human. The boy pulled out his knife, carefully, slowly, and began to pry open the trap. It took several minutes. When the mechanism finally snapped open, the wolf jerked, but didn't run, just lay on its side, breathing heavily. One of the younger wolves came up and licked its muzzle. The others quietly observed. The boy sat on the steps of the forester's cabin. The wolves kept their distance but didn't leave, and he stayed there for the night. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. No crickets, no wind, only the heavy breathing of the wolf and the occasional creak of wooden beams. He doesn't remember when he fell asleep, but in the morning he woke up on the floor. The wolves were gone, all but the gray one, the one he had freed, which sat nearby, watching him. Then it stood and slowly walked into the forest. The boy didn't follow. When he got up, he noticed something glinting in the dust near the door. A small pendant, metallic, dark in color, shaped like a wolf's paw. In the center, an engraved symbol, simple, geometric, but oddly familiar. He picked it up, cold, heavy. He didn't know what it was, but somehow he felt it wasn't left there by accident. The road home was long, not physically, but mentally. The boy walked in silence, the pendant in his pocket. From time to time, he'd touch it through the fabric, as if to make sure it was still there. By the time he emerged from the forest, the sun was already rising above the ridge. The air was fresh, but the scent of autumn was already present, the kind that smells like damp grass and smoke from distant chimneys. As he approached the house, his grandfather was already standing on the porch, stern with a cigarette butt in his fist. The dog sat beside him and didn't whine, just waited. "Aha," the grandfather said when he saw his grandson. "So you decided to go on your own. Good, foolish, but brave." The boy didn't answer. He just took the pendant from his pocket and handed it to the old man. He looked at it and fell silent. Something changed in his gaze. He was quiet for a long time. His fingers gripped the metal as if they recognized it. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "By the old cabin in the forest. There was a wolf, caught in a trap. I freed him, and in the morning, the pendant was just lying there." The grandfather was silent a bit longer, then nodded and said, "Key, so come with me." He led the boy to the old part of the house. There, under the stairs, stood a low wooden chest. The grandfather wiped the dust off with his sleeve, unlocked the clasp, and lifted the lid. Inside were several old things: a piece of cloth with an embroidered symbol, a knife wrapped in linen, yellowed photographs, a few handwritten pages, and several pendants, almost identical to the boy's, each shaped like a wolf's paw, but with slightly different patterns. "All this belonged to your great-grandfather," the grandfather said, gently laying the items out. "He was a forester. Long ago, when I was still a boy, he used to take me to those same places, taught me how to see the forest, and he told strange stories about wolves who remember, about people who had a connection with them." "A connection? What kind?" "I don't know exactly, but he said that long ago, people and wolves weren't enemies, that somewhere, far back in time, some people could understand wolves, not as animals, as there weren't many, and each had their own mark, a pendant." "Is that a legend?" "Maybe, or maybe not. When I was very young, I once saw my great-grandfather leave meat on a rock in the forest, The next day it was gone, and in its place, a pendant like this one. I asked, and he just said, "It's a thank you." The grandfather fell silent, then placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You said the wolves didn't attack, that they led you to that place, that the wolf didn't run away. That's not random. They chose you for something. For what? That's what we'll try to find out." He put the pendants back into the chest, all but one, the one the boy had found. "This one's yours, now." That evening they sat in silence. The grandfather rummaged through old notes, pulled out an old notebook filled with drawings, diagrams, descriptions of herbs, places, tracks. There were sketches of paw prints, old maps, and markings. "All of this your great-grandfather collected. I never paid much attention to it, but now I wonder, maybe he knew something." Before bed, the boy looked at the pendant again. He touched the symbol with his finger, and at that moment, something shifted in his memory. An image, a wolf, gray, eyes, the forest. He remembered everything, not in fragments, but clearly, as if the pendant helped him recall. In the morning, the boy woke up before dawn. He walked over to the window and froze. At the edge of the field behind the house stood a wolf, the same one, large, gray, with the injured paw. It looked straight at him, then slowly lowered its head, as if greeting him, and vanished into the mist. The grandfather stood by the table, leaning on it with both hands. On the wooden surface lay the pendants, old pages, scorched photographs. Off to the side, the great-grandfather's notebook, with yellowed pages and neat, tiny handwriting. The boy sat across from him, silently flipping through the pages. "Look, this," the grandfather pointed. "This is the symbol on your pendant. Your great-grandfather used it to mark places. Here, here, and here, 3 points. By the forest, the old sheepfold, and the cabin where you found the pendant. Coincidence?" The boy studied the map. It was hand-drawn, with arrows, crosses, and lines. But the 3 paw symbols stood out immediately, each in its place. One of them marked the exact location where he had spent the night with the wolves. "You think they left these for him? Maybe. Or maybe he left them for them." The grandfather leaned against the wall. All his life, he said there are things not meant for everyone. That wolves have memory, that there's something more in them, not just instinct. The boy touched the pendant. It was warm, as if it had been lying in the sun, even though it had been in his pocket all day. He stared at it and couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just metal, that it was a sign, a key. "Do you believe in this?" the boy asked. The grandfather paused. "Not before, but as I got older," he smiled. "Once in the mountains I lost the flock. A storm, darkness, lightning. The dog got scared and ran off. I was alone. I thought it was all over. But at dawn I found them, standing in a clearing, all safe. And behind them, tracks, not mine, wolf tracks. And not a single one was touched." The boy was silent. Something tightened in his chest. Not fear, but something important. They discussed the notebook stories until late that evening. The notes included scents, behaviors, migration patterns, even how wolves reacted to human presence, to sound, light, fire. The great-grandfather had documented everything meticulously, but here and there were notes that seemed like observations of something else. June 5th, heard a howl at night, one voice. 20 minutes later, a reply, then silent. In the morning, a pendant by the door. Unknown, not mine. August 15th, old gray wolf stepped out from behind the trees, stood at a distance, showed no aggression, stepped back after I left meat. In the morning, a new symbol on the stone. Looked like a paw print made from twigs. The boy read those lines and realized this had been systematic. His great-grandfather hadn't just been imagining things. He had observed, and the wolves had responded. Late that night, they finally turned off the lights. The grandfather lay in his room, the boy on a bench near the stove. He placed the pendant beside him, right on the wooden windowsill. He couldn't sleep. His mind was full of what he had seen, heard, remembered. And just as he began to drift off, he heard a sound. Quiet, barely audible, like a paw against the earth. Then another, and another. He sat up, his heart beat fast. He walked to the window and carefully peeked outside. In the yard stood a pack of, not fleeing, not attacking, just standing a few meters from the house. Silently, a few young, and among them, the gray wolf, the same one. His injured paw barely limped now. The gray one looked straight into the window for a long time, then slowly lowered his head, as if bowing. The boy wasn't even afraid. He just felt something strange, warm, as if he had been acknowledged. The dog behind the door didn't bark, only whined softly, as if sensing something too ancient, too strong. After a minute, the pack turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving no sound behind. The boy returned to his bed, picked up the pendant, and understood this was not the end. This was only the beginning. The wolves had come to change something, and when it was done, they simply disappeared, not loudly, not noticeably, without a trace, without a howl. The next morning after that final night, the boy got up before sunrise and stepped outside. Where the pack had stood, there was nothing, just a few bent blades of grass that could have belonged to anything. The dog was quiet, didn't even sniff, as if he too had been told, "That's enough." That spring, no one saw a single wolf again. Not in the village, nor the forest, nor the ridges above. No one heard howls, found tracks. Hunters, once proud of their wolf hunts, now only shrugged. They must have moved on. And the old shepherds would nod slowly and mumble, "When the wolf leaves on its own, it means everything's back in place." The sheep stopped disappearing. Chicken coops remained untouched. Goat kids were born without worry. The dog began to sleep soundly again near the fold. Even old Maria, who always grumbled, "Nothing good ever comes from that forest," now sometimes gazed eastward and said, "Quiet, listen how quiet it's gotten." And nature came alive again. Within weeks, people started noticing things they had long taken for granted, now felt new. Young deer appeared near the stream. Beavers returned to the old dam. Wild ducks started nesting in the swamp again. And even a lynx, once seen only once in a decade, was spotted twice in 1 month. Balance had returned. The grandfather sat on the porch with a new flint and was carving a stick. The boy's pendant hung on a nail by the door. He didn't wear it constantly. There was no need. But each evening, he would touch it, as if checking, still here, still remembers. The boy no longer searched for the wolves. Didn't wander the forest randomly. He knew the wolf would find him, if needed. And now, there was no need. This wasn't the end, this was peace. Months passed. Autumn once again cast its shadows over the village. Leaves fell from trees like paper letters no one read anymore. People prepared for winter, stacking firewood, insulating walls, smoking meat. But the fear was gone. The wolves, silent guardians of the forest, had left their sign, and it was enough. They didn't return, because there was no need. The boy was quieter now. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he had learned to listen to the forest, to the earth, to the silence in which sometimes one could hear more than in any scream. And every night when he fell asleep, the pendant on the nail would gently sway in the shadows, and it seemed to whisper something just for him, about the wolf, about the forest, about memory that never fades.